I never thought a $200 fine would lead to a federal investigation. But when you own the only private road leading to an entire HOA community in rural Montana, sometimes things escalate in ways nobody expects. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and I purchased my property on Timber Ridge outside of Whitefish, Montana, back in 2019. The place came with 80 acres of pristine land, a modest cabin that I'd been fixing up, and something I didn't fully appreciate at the time, a quarter-mile gravel road that connected my property to County Road 47. It was my road, on my land, maintained by me. The previous owner had granted an easement to the Timber Ridge Homeowners Association for access to their gated community of 35 homes that sat beyond my property. Without that road, they'd have to drive an extra 12 miles around the mountain to reach the county highway. For the first 3 years, everything was fine. I plowed the road in winter because I needed to get in and out anyway, and it didn't bother me that the HOA residents used it too. They waved when they drove past, occasionally dropped off a bottle of wine or some homemade jam as a thank you. It was neighborly, simple, the way things should be in a small mountain community. Then Patricia Brennan became HOA president in January 2023. I first met Patricia on a Tuesday morning when she showed up at my door unannounced. She was 52, had that distinctive haircut that somehow screamed, "Let me speak to your manager," and wore a puffy North Face jacket that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her SUV idling in my driveway was one of those massive Escalades that seemed completely unnecessary for one person. "Daniel Whitmore," she asked, not waiting for confirmation before continuing. "I'm Patricia Brennan, president of the Timber Ridge HOA. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss some concerns about road maintenance." I wiped my hands on my jeans. I'd been working on replacing some rotted deck boards. "Nice to meet you. What concerns?" "Well, I've noticed the road isn't always plowed as promptly as it should be. Last week after that storm, it wasn't cleared until almost noon. Some of our residents were late for work." I felt my jaw tighten. "I plow when I can. I work from home mostly, so I don't always get to it first thing." "I understand, but our community has standards. We're prepared to offer you $300 per month during winter season if you commit to clearing the road within 4 hours of snowfall cessation." She smiled like she was doing me a huge favor. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in turning this into a job. I plow when I need to get out, and that's worked fine for everyone." Her smile vanished. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't think you understand. That road serves 35 families. We have a right to reliable access. You have an easement for access, not for snow removal service. Those are different things." She stared at me for a long moment. "We'll see about that. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." After she left, I looked up the actual easement agreement. It was straightforward. The HOA had right-of-way to use the road for ingress and egress. Nothing about maintenance, nothing about snow removal, nothing about timing. The road was mine, and any maintenance I did was purely voluntary. I should have known Patricia wouldn't let it go. 2 weeks later, we got a massive storm. 14 inches fell overnight, and by morning the whole mountain was buried. I woke up around 8, made coffee, and checked my email. I had some work deadlines, but nothing urgent. Around 10, I fired up my plow truck and cleared the road. It took about 90 minutes to do a thorough job. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a formal notice from the Timber Ridge HOA citing me for failure to maintain community access road to minimum standards and imposing a $200 fine, payable within 30 days. I read it 3 times, anger building with each pass. They were fining me for not plowing my own road fast enough to suit them. I called the number on the letterhead. A woman answered. Timber Ridge HOA, this is Cheryl. This is Daniel Whitmore. I just received a fine notice and I need to speak with Patricia Brennan immediately. Mrs. Brennan is in a board meeting. Can I take a message? Tell her the fine is bullshit and she can expect to hear from my lawyer. Sir, there's no need for profanity. I hung up. The next morning, Patricia called me. Mr. Whitmore, I understand you're upset about the fine. You're damn right I'm upset. You have no authority to fine me for anything. That's my road on my property. Actually, if you read the revised HOA bylaws from our January meeting, Section 12.4 clearly states that the access road is considered a community asset, and all community assets must be maintained according to our standards. Your bylaws don't apply to me. I'm not part of your HOA. The easement makes you subject to certain regulations. No, it doesn't. Have you actually read the easement? There was a pause. Our attorney has reviewed all relevant documents and assures us we're within our rights. If you don't pay the fine, we'll be forced to take legal action. Something in her tone made me see red. This woman, who'd lived here less than 6 months, was threatening to sue me for not being her personal snow removal service. Patricia, let me be very clear. I am not paying your fine. I am not subject to your HOA. And if you want to take legal action, go right ahead. But you should know that snow removal was never part of the easement agreement, which means I've been doing it as a courtesy. A courtesy I can stop providing at any time. You wouldn't dare. You'd strand 35 families. Watch me. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, heart pounding. I wasn't bluffing. If they wanted to treat me like an employee they could fine and control, they could find another way to access their precious community. I called my lawyer, Tom Henderson, who had an office in Whitefish. Tom was in his 60s, had practiced property law for 40 years and knew every easement dispute in Flathead County. Daniel, good to hear from you. What's going on? I explained the situation. Tom listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Well, they're way out of bounds, he said when I finished. An easement grants access, not control. They have no authority to fine you, and their HOA bylaws are meaningless to a non-member. But here's the thing. If you stop plowing, they might try to claim you're interfering with their easement rights. How? The easement doesn't guarantee snow removal. Right, but they could argue that by previously providing that service, you created an expectation or implied agreement. It's a weak argument, but I've seen HOAs try weaker. So, what do you recommend? Send them a formal letter stating that snow removal was always voluntary, that you're not subject to their authority, and that you won't be providing that service going forward. Make it clear they still have the easement for access, but they're responsible for their own snow removal. I'll draft something. How fast can you do it? Have it ready by end of business today. 3 days later, Tom's letter was sent via certified mail. In it, he laid out the legal reality. I owned the road, the easement granted access only. HOA bylaws didn't apply to non-members. The fine was invalid and effective immediately. I would no longer be providing snow removal services. The letter noted that the HOA was welcome to arrange their own snow removal on the easement area, provided they didn't damage my property. The response came faster than I expected. Patricia showed up at my door the next morning with 2 other people. A tall man in his 50s wearing expensive ski gear, and a younger woman with a tablet. Mr. Whitmore, this is Gerald Hutchins, our HOA vice president, and Monica Reed, our secretary. We're here to resolve this situation. There's nothing to resolve. I sent you my position. Gerald stepped forward. He had that businessman confidence, the kind that comes from years of people doing what he says. Look, Daniel, we all got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we start over? We're prepared to offer you $500 a month for winter road maintenance. Not interested. $700. You're not hearing me. This isn't about money. You tried to fine me for not jumping when you said jump. You tried to claim authority you don't have. So now you can handle your own snow removal. Patricia's face was turning red. You're being incredibly selfish. There are children in our community who need to get to school, people who need to get to work. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to play power games. Monica, the secretary, spoke up. She seemed more reasonable than the other two. Mr. Whitmore, I understand you're angry, but surely we can work something out. What if we rescind the fine and apologize? I almost considered it. Almost. But then Patricia opened her mouth again. We're not apologizing for upholding community standards. If you won't be reasonable, we'll take this to court and force you to maintain the road. That sealed it. Get off my property, all of you, and don't come back. They left, Patricia muttering about lawsuits and consequences. The next snowfall came 4 days later, 8 inches overnight. I watched from my window as the snow piled up on the road. Around 9 in the morning, I saw the first vehicle attempt to make it through. It was a pickup truck, probably someone who thought they could power through. They made it about 100 yards before getting stuck. My phone started ringing at 9:30. I didn't recognize the number and didn't answer. Then another call, and another. By 10 o'clock, I had 14 missed calls and a voicemail box that was full. I listened to one message from a panicked-sounding woman. Mr. Whitmore, this is Deborah Chen from Timber Ridge. My husband has a medical appointment in Kalispell and we can't get out. Please, we need help. I felt a twinge of guilt but pushed it down. This wasn't on me. Patricia had created this situation. Around noon, I saw a small convoy of vehicles trying to leave the HOA community. They were following a heavy-duty pickup with a plow attachment. Looked like they'd hired someone. Good. They'd figure it out. But that night, Patricia must have been making calls because the next morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. Deputy Mike Garrett was someone I'd met a few times at the general store in town. He looked uncomfortable. Daniel, I'm here about a complaint. Patricia Brennan says you're blocking access to Timber Ridge. I'm not blocking anything. The road's open, it just has snow on it, same as every other private road in the county. She says you usually plow it. I used to, as a courtesy. But the HOA decided to start fining me for not plowing fast enough, so I stopped. That's my right, Mike. It's my road. He nodded slowly. I figured it was something like that. Look, I told her this was a civil matter, not a criminal one. You're not doing anything illegal. But she's making noise about emergency access and public safety. The easement gives them access. They can plow it themselves, hire someone, use snowmobiles, whatever they want, but they don't get to fine me and threaten me and then demand I work for them for free. I get it. Just wanted to give you a heads up that she's on the warpath. Woman called my captain 3 times yesterday. After Mike left, I did some research. I found out that the HOA had tried to hire 2 different snow removal companies, but both had declined once they learned about the situation. Word gets around in small communities, and no one wanted to get in the middle of a property dispute. Plus, plowing someone else's private road without the owner's permission was legally risky. Over the next week, the situation deteriorated. The HOA residents were stuck using snowmobiles and ATVs to get to their vehicles, which they parked at my property line on County Road 47. It was inconvenient and time-consuming, but doable. Some people left angry notes on my mailbox. Others tried to reason with me in person. A man named Jeff Kowalski, who lived in Timber Ridge with his wife and 2 kids, caught me outside one afternoon. He was exhausted looking, carrying grocery bags from a sled hitched to his snowmobile. Daniel, I know you're mad at Patricia. I get it. She's been a nightmare for a lot of us too. But my kids are missing school because of this. Can't we work something out? I felt bad for Jeff. He seemed like a decent guy caught in a bad situation. Jeff, I'm sorry. I really am, but Patricia tried to fine me $200 and threatened legal action when I told her no. This is on the HOA board, not on me. What if we replace the board? Would you reconsider? Maybe. But that would take months, and honestly, the trust is broken. They need to arrange their own snow removal. We're trying, but no one will take the job. That's not my problem. He nodded sadly and left. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about those kids missing school, about people like Jeff who had nothing to do with Patricia's power trip. But I also knew that if I backed down now, the HOA would learn they could bully me whenever they wanted. 2 weeks into the standoff, things took a weird turn. I got a call from a reporter at the Whitefish Pilot, the local newspaper. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Amanda Cross. I'm doing a story on the Timber Ridge access dispute. Would you be willing to comment? How'd you hear about this?" The HOA sent out a press release. "They're claiming you're holding 35 families hostage over a minor fee dispute." I laughed bitterly. "Of course they are. Yeah, I'll talk to you, but I want to make sure you get the full story." We talked for 45 minutes. I explained the easement, the attempted fine, Patricia's threats, everything. Amanda sounded sympathetic but professional. "I've reached out to the HOA for comment. Patricia Brennan gave me quite an earful about community responsibility and freeloading neighbors." "Did she mention that I'm not part of the HOA and never was?" She kind of glossed over that part. The story ran 3 days later, front page of the local section. Amanda had done her homework, pulling the actual easement documents and interviewing Tom Henderson about property law. The headline read, "Property Rights Dispute Strands Timber Ridge Residents." The article was fair, laying out both sides but making it clear that legally, I was in the right. It quoted Patricia extensively, which turned out to be a mistake on her part, because she came across as entitled and unreasonable. "Mr. Whitmore has a moral obligation to maintain that road," she was quoted as saying. "His selfishness is endangering our entire community. We're exploring all legal options to force compliance." The comments section on the newspaper's website exploded. Most people sided with me, pointing out that the HOA had created their own problem. But there were some who thought I was being petty and should just plow the damn road. The publicity changed things. Suddenly, everyone in Whitefish knew about the dispute. I got stopped in the grocery store by strangers who wanted to share their own HOA horror stories. A few people bought me beers at the brewery and told me to stand firm, but the pressure on the HOA ramped up too. Parents were complaining about kids missing school. People were late for work. One elderly resident apparently had to miss a doctor's appointment for a chronic condition. 3 weeks into February, Patricia made her biggest mistake. I was in town having lunch at the Craggy Range Bar and Grill when my phone rang. It was Tom Henderson, and he sounded urgent. "Daniel, where are you right now?" "In town." "Why? Get home. Now. The HOA is trying to plow your road without permission." I threw cash on the table and sprinted to my truck. I made the 20-minute drive in 15, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got to my property, I found a massive commercial plow truck on my road, clearing snow. Behind it was Patricia's Escalade and 2 other vehicles. I pulled across the road entrance, blocking them from leaving, and jumped out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The plow driver, a guy in his 30s I didn't recognize, shut off his truck and climbed down. "Look, man, I'm just doing a job. They hired me to clear this road. This is private property. I didn't give permission for this." Patricia got out of her Escalade looking triumphant. We have an easement. That gives us the right to maintain the road. No, it doesn't. An easement for access doesn't grant you maintenance rights without the property owner's permission. You're trespassing. We're exercising our legal rights. I pulled out my phone and called 911. I need a sheriff's deputy. I have trespassers on my property who refuse to leave. Patricia's confidence wavered. You're being ridiculous. You're on my property without permission, operating heavy equipment on my land. That's trespassing and possibly property damage. The plow driver looked nervous. Lady, you said this was legal. It is legal, Patricia insisted. Deputy Garrett showed up 20 minutes later, along with another deputy I didn't know. Mike looked tired. All right, what's going on? I explained. Patricia interrupted multiple times, insisting they had every right to plow the road. Mike listened to both sides, then shook his head. Madam, Mr. Whitmore is correct. The easement grants access, not maintenance rights. You're on his property without permission. You need to leave. This is absurd. We'll sue everyone involved. That's your right, madam. But right now, you're trespassing, and if you don't leave, I'll have to cite you. The plow driver didn't need to be told twice. He climbed in his truck and backed carefully off my property, leaving deep ruts in places. Patricia and her group left too, but not before Patricia pointed at me and said, "You haven't heard the last of this." After they left, I surveyed the damage. The plow had gouged some sections of the road pretty badly, and there were tracks through some areas that I'd specifically kept clear for drainage. It wasn't terrible, but it was my property, and they damaged it. Tom Henderson advised me to document everything and consider filing for a restraining order if Patricia tried anything else. She's escalating, Tom said. People like her don't back down until they're forced to. He was right. That weekend, someone spray-painted "selfish prick" on my mailbox. I had no proof it was Patricia, but I had strong suspicions. I filed a vandalism report with the sheriff's office. Then things got even stranger. On a Tuesday morning in late February, I heard a helicopter. Not that unusual in Montana, but this one was circling low over my property. I went outside and saw it was a news helicopter from a Kalispell TV station. An hour later, my phone rang. It was a producer from the station. "Mr. Whitmore, we're doing a story on the Timber Ridge situation. We've been contacted by the HOA, and they're claiming you're violating state highway access laws. Would you like to comment?" "What highway access laws? This is a private road." "They're saying the road is the only reasonable access to their community, and that state law requires you to maintain it." I felt my blood pressure rising. That's completely false. They have an easement. The road is mine. State highway laws don't apply. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview? Against Tom's advice, I said yes. I was tired of Patricia controlling the narrative. The interview aired that night. I watched it with a mix of dread and curiosity. They'd edited it into she said story, with me explaining property rights and Patricia tearfully talking about endangered children and isolated elderly residents. But they'd also interviewed a property law professor from the University of Montana, who confirmed that I was legally in the right. The professor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, was blunt. HOAs sometimes forget that they're not sovereign entities. They can't impose rules on non-members or seize control of private property through easements. What they are attempting here is legally baseless. The story went regional, then national. Suddenly, I was getting calls from CNN and Fox News. The whole thing had become a symbol for the debate over property rights versus community responsibility, with people on both sides having strong opinions about someone they'd never met. I declined most interview requests. I wasn't interested in becoming a poster child for any political movement. I just wanted Patricia to leave me alone. In early March, the HOA filed a lawsuit. I'd been expecting it, but seeing the actual complaint was still infuriating. They were seeking an injunction forcing me to provide snow removal services and claiming damages for lost work time, mental distress, and diminished property values. Tom read through it and actually laughed. This is one of the worst complaints I've seen in 30 years. They don't have standing for half these claims, and their legal theory is nonsense. So we'll win, absolutely. But it'll take time and money. They're counting on wearing you down. The preliminary hearing was set for late March. In the meantime, winter was starting to wind down. The snow was melting, and people could mostly drive the road even without plowing. The immediate crisis was over, but the legal battle was just beginning. I spent the next few weeks preparing for court, gathering documents, and dealing with the surreal experience of being semi-famous. A few national media outlets ran think pieces about the case. I was alternately praised as a property rights hero and condemned as a selfish jerk. One article that bothered me was in a progressive magazine, painting me as a libertarian extremist who didn't care if elderly people died because they couldn't reach medical care. It completely ignored the fact that the HOA could easily arrange their own snow removal, and that I'd been providing the service for free until they tried to fine and threaten me. But there were also supportive articles, including one in a property rights journal that used my case as an example of HOA overreach. Through all of this, I kept to myself on my property, working remotely and trying to live normally. But the stress was taking a toll. I wasn't sleeping well, and I'd lost about 15 pounds. Jeff Kowalski stopped by one afternoon in mid-March. The road was muddy but passable. "Daniel, I wanted you to know that some of us in the community are trying to recall Patricia and the board. We've got enough signatures to force a special election." That's good, I guess. I also wanted to apologize. A lot of us didn't know what Patricia was doing until it exploded. She told everyone you'd refused reasonable compensation and were holding the community hostage. When the truth came out, a lot of people were angry at her, not you. I appreciate that, Jeff. But the damage is done. Even if Patricia's gone, I don't think I can go back to plowing that road. Every time it snowed, I'd wonder if I was doing it fast enough, if someone was going to complain or threaten me. He nodded. I understand. For what it's worth, we're setting up a community snow removal fund. We've hired a company out of Kalispell that's willing to do it. They'll start next winter. Good. That's how it should have been from the beginning. The court hearing in late March was anticlimactic. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judith Kowalski, no relation to Jeff, listened to both sides for about 30 minutes. Patricia's lawyer, a young guy named Brandon Mills who was in over his head, tried to argue that the easement implied maintenance obligations, and that I'd created a binding, informal contract by providing snow removal for several years. Tom demolished those arguments in about 5 minutes, citing case law and the actual language of the easement. He also pointed out that the HOA had no legal standing to collect damages from a non-member. Judge Kowalski didn't even need to take it under advisement. I'm denying the injunction. Mr. Whitmore has no legal obligation to provide snow removal services. The easement grants access only. If the HOA wants maintenance, they need to negotiate an agreement or handle it themselves. As for damages, the HOA has no standing to collect from a non-member for actions taken on his own property. Case dismissed. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. She started to say something, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters waited. Tom had coached me on what to say. I'm pleased the court recognized basic property rights. I hope the HOA will now focus on finding a reasonable solution for their community instead of trying to control their neighbors. Patricia pushed past without commenting, but I heard her mutter something about appeals. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a warm April morning, I was working on my deck when I noticed smoke. A lot of smoke, coming from the direction of County Road 47. I drove down to investigate and found my access road entrance engulfed in flames. Someone had piled brush and doused it with accelerant, creating a bonfire that blocked the road entrance. I called 911, and the volunteer fire department from Whitefish responded within 20 minutes. They put out the fire, but the message was clear. Someone was trying to intimidate me. Deputy Garrett came out to investigate. Any idea who might have done this? I have suspicions. Patricia Brennan. I'm not accusing anyone without proof, but yeah, that's my suspicion. We'll investigate. In the meantime, you might want to consider security cameras. I installed cameras that week, covering my property entrance and key areas of the road. It was expensive, but I wasn't going to be run off my own land by arson attempts. The next incident came 3 days later. I was in town when Tom called. "Daniel, you need to see this." He texted me a link to the Timber Ridge HOA Facebook page. Patricia had posted a long screed accusing me of terrorism, claiming I was trying to destroy their community and calling for residents to take a stand against tyranny. The post was unhinged, full of wild accusations and barely veiled threats. Several people had commented, some supporting her but others telling her to calm down and accept the court's ruling. "This is harassment," Tom said. "We can get a restraining order based on this and the arson attempt." We filed for a restraining order the next day. The hearing was set for a week out, but in the meantime, Patricia was required to stay at least 500 feet from me and my property. That should have been the end of it. Instead, things got worse. On a Thursday night, I was woken at 2 in the morning by headlights sweeping across my bedroom window. I looked out and saw 3 vehicles parked on my property, people getting out with what looked like tools. I grabbed my phone and my shotgun, a Remington 870 I kept for wildlife protection, and called 911. "This is Daniel Whitmore on Timber Ridge Road. I have multiple trespassers on my property, possibly armed." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Are they threatening you?" "They're on my property at 2 in the morning. I don't know what they're planning. Deputies are en route. Stay inside and lock your doors." I watched from my window, shotgun ready. The people were doing something to my road, but I couldn't see what. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights appeared. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up and deputies got out with flashlights. I met them outside, keeping my shotgun pointed safely at the ground. "They're down by the road," I said. The deputies found 5 people, including Patricia, spread across the road. They'd been hammering stakes into the ground and stringing rope across the road, apparently trying to physically block access. Deputy Garrett looked furious. "Mrs. Brennan, you're in violation of a restraining order." "We're exercising our right to protest," Patricia said. "This man is destroying our community." "You're trespassing on private property at 2 in the morning. Everyone here is under arrest." That got everyone's attention. The other 4 people started protesting, claiming they didn't know they were trespassing, that Patricia had told them it was legal. It didn't matter. All 5 were arrested and taken to the county jail. The next morning, I gave a formal statement at the sheriff's office. The other 4 people arrested with Patricia were HOA residents. Gerald Hutchins, Monica Reid, and 2 others I didn't know, named Keith Sanders and Olivia Grant. All 5 were charged with trespassing, and Patricia got an additional charge for violating the restraining order. They were released on bail later that day. The story made regional news again. This time, the coverage was less sympathetic to Patricia. Headlines like HOA president arrested in property dispute didn't paint her in a good light. The Timber Ridge community was in chaos. According to Jeff, who kept me updated, about 2/3 of the residents were horrified by Patricia's actions and wanted her removed immediately. The other third still supported her, believing I was somehow the villain. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week. I didn't attend, obviously, but Jeff filled me in on what happened. The meeting was apparently a screaming match. Patricia defended her actions, claiming she was protecting the community. Several residents called for her immediate resignation. Gerald Hutchins tried to calm everyone down but just made things worse when he suggested they continue the legal fight against me. Finally, someone made a motion to recall the entire board. It passed by a vote of 26-7. A temporary board was elected on the spot, with Jeff Kowalski as interim president. Their first action was to publicly apologize to me and announce that the HOA would no longer pursue any legal action or attempt to control my property. Jeff called me that night. "Daniel, on behalf of the Timber Ridge HOA, I want to formally apologize for everything you've been put through. Patricia and the board acted without authority and created this entire mess. We're going to handle our own snow removal going forward, and we'll respect your property rights." I appreciate that, Jeff. I also want you to know that Patricia's been asked to resign from the HOA entirely. If she doesn't, we'll pursue formal removal. What about the criminal charges? That's up to the court. But between you and me, I hope they throw the book at her. What she did was inexcusable. The criminal case moved forward through April and May. Patricia's lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she believed she had a right to be on the property due to the easement. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Alice Crawford, wasn't having it. "Your client was arrested at 2 in the morning while trespassing on private property in violation of a restraining order," Alice argued at a pre-trial hearing. Her claimed belief is irrelevant and not credible. The judge agreed. The case would go to trial. In the meantime, I tried to return to normal life. The snow was gone, spring had arrived, and the constant stress of the past few months was finally easing. The new HOA board was professional and respectful. They'd hired a Kalispell snow removal company with a contract that specifically noted they'd be working on an easement across private property, and needed to coordinate with me about timing and methods. The fire department investigation into the arson attempt concluded that accelerants had been used, making it a felony. But they couldn't determine who'd done it. My security cameras hadn't been installed yet at that point. However, a break came in late May. A Timber Ridge resident named Marcus Donovan came forward and told deputies that Patricia had asked him to send Daniel a message by setting a fire. Marcus had refused and thought nothing more of it until the actual fire happened. Based on Marcus's testimony, Patricia was charged with felony arson. Her bail was revoked, and she was held in the county jail pending trial. The criminal trial started in mid-June. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching as the prosecution laid out its case. The trespassing and restraining order violation were straightforward. Multiple deputies testified about finding Patricia and the others on my property at 2 in the morning. The restraining order was submitted as evidence. The arson charge was more complex. Marcus Donovan testified about Patricia's request. The prosecution also brought in cell phone records, showing that Patricia had been near my property around the time of the fire, though that was circumstantial. Patricia's defense was that she'd been defending her community against an unreasonable property owner. Her lawyer tried to paint me as the aggressor, someone who'd created a crisis over a minor fine. The prosecution tore that argument apart. Alice Crawford methodically showed that Patricia had initiated every escalation. The fine, the threats, the unauthorized plowing, the Facebook posts, the middle-of-the-night trespassing, and likely the arson. When I testified, I kept it simple and factual. I explained the easement, the attempted fine, my decision to stop plowing, and everything that followed. Patricia's lawyer tried to make me look bad during cross-examination. "Mr. Whitmore, isn't it true that you punished an entire community because you were angry at one person?" "No. I stopped providing a voluntary service after the HOA tried to fine and threaten me. The HOA always had the option to arrange their own snow removal. They chose to escalate instead. But you knew people would be stranded. They weren't stranded. They had access via the easement. They just had to deal with snow, which they could have hired someone to clear." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts: criminal trespassing, violating a restraining order, and felony arson. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. I didn't attend that hearing, but Tom Henderson went and filled me in. Patricia got 2 years in state prison for the arson, with additional concurrent sentences for the other charges. The judge, clearly fed up with the whole situation, gave a brief speech about property rights and the rule of law. "Mrs. Brennan, you seem to believe that your position as HOA president gave you authority over people and property outside your jurisdiction. It did not. You terrorized a neighbor, violated court orders, and committed arson. Your actions endangered lives and property. The sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes." Patricia was led away in handcuffs, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The other 4 people arrested with her took plea deals for lesser charges and got probation. As summer arrived, life finally settled down. The Timber Ridge HOA sent me a formal written apology and a gift basket, which was a nice gesture, even though I hadn't asked for anything. Jeff Kowalski was elected permanent HOA president in a community vote. He ran into me at the hardware store in July and bought me a beer afterward. "Things are finally calm," he said. "The snow removal contract is signed for next winter. Everyone understands the boundaries now. Good. I'm glad it worked out. I still feel terrible about what you went through. Patricia was a nightmare for all of us, but you got the worst of it. It's over now. That's what matters." But it wasn't quite over. In August, I got a call from an FBI agent named Robert Carlson. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm investigating some financial irregularities related to the Timber Ridge HOA. I'd like to ask you some questions. About Patricia Brennan, among others. Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop in Whitefish. Agent Carlson was a serious man in his 40s, the kind who doesn't waste words. "We've been investigating Mrs. Brennan's finances and discovered some concerning patterns. It appears she embezzled approximately $47,000 from the HOA over a period of 18 months. I whistled. "How?" "Fake invoices, unauthorized transfers, that sort of thing. We're building a federal case." "I'm talking to you because I want to understand the context of her behavior. The criminal case in state court mentioned her obsession with controlling you and your property. I'm wondering if that was related to her trying to distract from the embezzlement." "That would make sense. She created a big external enemy for the community to focus on." "Exactly. Would you be willing to testify if needed?" "Sure. Whatever helps." The federal case against Patricia moved slowly, as these things do. But by December, she was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The prosecution alleged she'd stolen HOA funds and used them for personal expenses, including luxury vacations, designer clothes, and car payments. In February of the following year, Patricia took a plea deal. She got an additional 4 years in federal prison to run consecutive to her state sentence. She'd be locked up for at least 6 years total. I found out from Tom Henderson, who called me with the news. Looks like Patricia finally ran out of road. Good. She earned every day of that sentence. How are things otherwise? Quiet the way I like it. And things were quiet. The new HOA board was professional and respectful. The snow removal company they'd hired did a great job all through the winter. I waved at HOA residents when they drove past, and several waved back. One morning in March, almost exactly 2 years after this whole thing started, I was having coffee on my deck and watching the sunrise over the mountains. My phone rang. It was Jeff Kowalski. "Daniel, I wanted to give you an update. The HOA board met last night, and we voted to rename the access road." "Rename it?" "Yeah. We're calling it Whitmore Way in recognition of the fact that it's your road and always has been. We're also putting up a sign at the entrance thanking you for the easement access." I didn't know what to say for a moment. "Jeff, that's not necessary." "Maybe not. But it's the right thing to do. We want everyone who lives here to remember that this road is a privilege, not a right, and it exists because you've been generous enough to grant access. I appreciate that. Really." After we hung up, I sat on my deck for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. 2 years ago, a simple property dispute had spiraled into arson, arrests, criminal trials, and federal investigations. All because one person thought she could control something that wasn't hers. But there was a larger lesson in all of it, one that had become clear through the chaos. Property rights matter, boundaries matter, and no amount of community pressure or moral righteousness gives anyone the right to seize control of someone else's land. I never regretted my decision to stop plowing the road after Patricia tried to find me. It was the right choice, even though it caused short-term hardship for people who didn't deserve it. Because giving in would have set a precedent, would have told Patricia and every future HOA board that they could bully me into compliance. Standing firm had been hard and expensive and stressful, but it had also been necessary. A month later, I drove down to the entrance of my property and found the new sign Jeff had mentioned. It was simple and tasteful. Whitmore Way, private road easement access by permission of property owner. Below that was a smaller plaque. The Timber Ridge HOA thanks Daniel Whitmore for his continued courtesy in allowing easement access across his property. I smiled and drove back up to my cabin. The whole ordeal had taught me something important about standing your ground and not letting people push you around just because they claim to represent a community or a higher good. Patricia Brennan had thought her title as HOA president gave her power over me. She'd learned the hard way that authority has limits, and those limits are defined by law, not by personal conviction or self-righteousness. As spring turned to summer, I started a new project, building a workshop behind my cabin. I'd always wanted a proper space for woodworking, and I finally had the time and motivation to make it happen. Life moved on, peaceful and quiet, the way it should be in the mountains of Montana. The drama was behind me. Patricia was in prison where she belonged, and the Timber Ridge HOA had learned to respect boundaries. I never did plow their road again. And you know what? That was fine. They figured it out, found their own solution, and everyone moved forward. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to simply refuse to be part of it anymore. Patricia had tried to make me her employee, her subordinate, someone she could fine and control. By walking away from that dynamic entirely, I'd forced her hand and exposed her true nature. In the end, the only thing I'd really done was exercise my property rights and refuse to be bullied. Everything else, all the chaos and criminality and federal investigations, that was all on Patricia and her enablers. Standing in my new workshop that summer, running my hand over freshly cut lumber, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in 2 years. The nightmare was over, justice had been served, and life had returned to the quiet simplicity I'd moved to Montana to find. Sometimes you have to fight for your rights, even when it's hard and everyone's telling you to just give in for the sake of peace. Because real peace doesn't come from surrender. It comes from standing up for yourself and letting the chips fall where they may. I learned that lesson the hard way on a snowy Montana road, and I wouldn't change a single thing about how it all played out. The road was mine, always had been, and Patricia Brennan's attempt to seize control of it had cost her everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her finances, and 6 years of her life. Meanwhile, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do, on property that was undeniably and legally mine. That's what victory looks like, not some dramatic courtroom moment or public vindication, but simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing you stood your ground and won. The snow would fall again next winter, and the Timber Ridge residents would handle it themselves, the way they always should have. And I'd watch from my cabin window, warm and content, knowing that sometimes the best revenge is just living well and letting karma handle the rest. Patricia Brennan had tried to control something that wasn't hers and had paid the price. The HOA residents had learned a valuable lesson about respecting property rights and their neighbors. And I'd learned that sometimes you have to weather the storm to reach the calm on the other side. It had been one hell of a ride, from that first threatening fine to federal prison sentences, but through it all, one truth had remained constant. The road was mine, and no HOA in the world had the right to change that. As autumn arrived, and the leaves turned gold on the mountainside, I found myself actually grateful for everything that had happened. Not because I'd enjoyed it, I definitely hadn't, but because it had taught me something valuable about strength and boundaries and the importance of standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult. The new HOA board continued to be respectful and professional. Property values in Timber Ridge actually increased once Patricia was gone and the community stabilized. Several residents sent me Christmas cards that year, thanking me for my patience and apologizing again for what I'd gone through. I accepted their apologies graciously, because most of them truly hadn't known what Patricia was doing until it was too late. They'd been victims of her manipulation too, just in different ways. And when the first snow fell in November, I watched from my window as the contracted plow truck cleared the road efficiently and professionally. The driver waved to me as he passed, a gesture of respect from one working man to another. I waved back and poured another cup of coffee, grateful that the drama was finally, completely, undeniably over. The road that had caused so much trouble was just a road again, a strip of gravel and dirt winding through the Montana wilderness, unremarkable except for the lessons it had taught everyone involved. Property rights matter. Boundaries matter. And no amount of community pressure or HOA regulations can override the simple truth that what's yours is yours, and you have every right to defend it. That's the story of how a $200 fine led to federal prison sentences and taught an entire community about the limits of HOA authority. It's not the story I expected to tell when I moved to Montana seeking peace and quiet, but it's the one I got. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Because at the end of it all, I was still standing on my own property, master of my own domain, and Patricia Brennan was in federal prison where she belonged. Sometimes justice takes time, and sometimes it requires sacrifice, but eventually, the truth wins out and the bullies face consequences. That's what I held on to during the darkest moments of the dispute, and that's what was proven true in the end. The road was mine. It always had been. And nothing Patricia Brennan did could change that fundamental reality. So when people ask me if I regret my decision to stop plowing the road after that first fine, I tell them the truth. Not for a second. Because some principles are worth fighting for. Some lines can't be crossed. And some bullies need to learn that their authority ends where your property begins. That's the lesson of Whitmore Way. And it's a lesson that cost Patricia Brennan 6 years of her life to learn. I just hope other HOA presidents out there are paying attention, because property rights aren't negotiable. Easements don't grant control, and trying to bully your neighbors into submission is a really, really bad idea. The mountains of Montana taught me that, along with patience and perseverance, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did the right thing even when everyone said you should back down. And now, sitting on my deck with the workshop finished and winter approaching again, I can honestly say I'm at peace with everything that happened. The road is clear, the community is stable, Patricia is in prison, and life goes on in the beautiful, quiet way it should. That's all I ever wanted, and it's all I fought for. The right to live my life on my own terms, on my own property, without interference from people who thought they knew better. Mission accomplished.